he asks Marty out to the dance. She starts drinking and smoke. I love that when she pulls out some liquor and then Marty drinks some and then she starts smoking and Marty just spits it out. He's like, you smoke too? It's just so good.
Yeah, and the way that she's an alcoholic when we first see her, and he's telling her, maybe don't drink so much, right? It's not so good for you, right? So, because they always got that thing about if you go back in time, you're going to change the past, right? So, which ends up paying off in the end of this movie.
Right. Well, and then the other thing though is like there's the personal, like universal family stuff, but also there's the fun, like generational stuff. Like it's the 80s and the 50s. Like the worlds could not be more different. Just all the fun disconnects and fun. Like he goes in and asks for a Pepsi free, and the guy's like, "Well, if you want a Pepsi, you're gonna pay for it." Because Pepsi free was a soft drink in the 80s. That's just what it was called, and stuff like, "Who's the president in 1985? Ronald Reagan."
Oh, that's the best joke in the movie.
The actor,
Ronald Reagan, the actor. That is such a great, and it was funny because I didn't know that Ronald Reagan was an actor until much later, right? And I've seen a few movies with him now. So, like, now going back and being like, Ronald Reagan, the actor, like, what a brilliant line. Because they always ask that in time travel stories, who's the president, right?
Right.
And it's like, it seems so ridiculous that somebody like Ronald Reagan would get elected, right? So, I don't know, it is a brilliant, brilliant line. It's absolutely hilarious. So, man, when I was a kid, though, that line when he goes into the diner and he's wearing that vest, right? And the guy behind the counter is like, "What did you do? Jump ship?" My sister and I howled at that line. I don't know why. So many times we had rented this movie from the video store when we were kids. And we just rewound that line and watched it over and over and over and just howled every time he said it. I don't know why. It was just the funniest thing when I was like 10 years old. What'd you do? Jump ship?
Yeah, the life jacket. Yeah, the whole fashion, all that, and the mayor. It's like, I'm gonna be mayor, and all that stuff. Like, it just so much happens right there. And then how like history repeats itself, where he sees Biff as the bully and his dad, and it just translates like what they were doing in high school all the way to what they're doing when they're adults. And you're like, would that really happen like that? Like, I don't know. I know people that are kind of in the same the same cycle of life, so who knows, right? But then that becomes not just in this movie, but the whole trilogy. That becomes like an ongoing thing. Like all the same situations happen again and again with the different characters and different time periods, and that's what's fun about the time travel. I think they do a lot of fun with the time travel. When you think about it, the time travel is really just a conceit. It's not like the movie's like not all about the time travel, but it's presented in such an entertaining but feasible way. Because you got this crazy doctor who's like, yeah, I got plutonium, we got a DeLorean. You're like, okay, like the flux capacitor. You kind of. You roll with it because it's so entertaining and you enjoy the journey. But there's so many like emotional climaxes of the movie too, because there's the whole part, like one of the best scenes, like that's like one of the best like stand up and cheer moments in a movie, right? Is when George kind of steps up and punches out Biff. Like that is a great moment. That's right up there with like Darth Vader killing the Emperor at the end of Return of the Jedi, right? To me anyway, because you're like, because the whole movie, this guy, he's been a wimp, and he's like. He's gonna live away. He's gonna go and what he thinks is go break up Marty and Lorraine, and like it's a big stage thing. And he sees it's Biff. Who's truly taking advantage of her, and he's like, "No, Biff, you leave her alone." And he actually stands up for himself and changes history. So that's huge, and that's like a great story. So that's like a huge emotional moment. And then you have, of course, getting back to the future. They even say it that way in the movie. I love that scene. With Doc and Marty, he's like, "We're gonna send you back to the future," and he points like at the screen, almost breaking the fourth wall. But that's a whole nother emotional climax. You're like, "Oh man, like is Marty gonna get back in time?" The lightning, the stuff, like there's so many like in another movie, like one of those two or three things would be the big climax. But there's plenty of those in the movie. There's so much going on, and that just keeps going, like it's nonstop.
In the end, the way that they pace it out, like it's almost like it's too much. With the things that are stopping the climax from happening, but it's like when you get through it, there's such a relief because it turns out to be just enough. Like when the thing breaks off, he's got to go up there, and then it breaks off again, and then the car won't start, and like all these crazy things keep happening, and it's like, oh, I don't know, just it draws that tension out like just long enough where it's like almost unbearable, and then he goes back to the future.
Well, and I think that it helps, but this is a. I mean, it's hard to describe this movie, like, because it's a comedy, but it's also action, it's also sci-fi, it's also romance. But the undercurrent of comedy is what helps, because it's things getting more and more ridiculous. Like in a dramatic movie, like that's ridiculous, right? But since it's like they're having fun with it, and they want you to know they're having fun with it, we're all having fun with it together. We're all on the same page, right? The filmmakers and the audience, and I think that's what helps a lot. Because you're right, like how many times can the wire get, unplugged at the clock tower and things like that? But a whole, something I guess when I was watching it as a kid, I didn't really realize, because you kind of watch all three together, right? Like all these trilogies do if you're born after they come out. That's how you watch them. But the whole undercurrent of like Doc's gonna die in the future, but Marty wants to try and stop that. Like that's something I didn't really like kind of pick up on until I was maybe a little older watching it, because I'm like, oh, there's two more. Doc's fine.
Yeah.
But that's a huge part of it. Like Doc dies in the original timeline, and Marty keeps trying to figure out a way to communicate that to him. Like, and I thought that was another thing that added another layer, because even when he gets back in the future, he has to go stop Doc from getting shot. So you're not even safe then.
Yeah, and then the car won't start again. So yeah. Yeah, it's really well drawn out, and this is one of the examples of like really really classic movie making, and the 80s was really really good for. We had a lot of these underdog heroes, right, that had to come up and overcome these massive odds against them and whatnot, and succeed. And like me as an average person, like these types of movies are always those fantastical movies that I wish I could live out. Like going on a different tangent, because, I was the nerdy kid that never asked the girl out, and it's like, what would it be different if I, stood up for myself a little bit more? And like, I think everybody can relate to a character like this, like Marty, and like Marty's father.
Yeah, I mean, this is wish fulfillment when you want to be as cool as as Marty McFly. You want to beat up the bully if you're George McFly, right? So that's a huge part of it too. I think that's why it works for no matter what age you see it as. Like, because when you're a kid, you're like, oh, cool, I want to be Marty. But when you're like, older, I can only imagine, people, in their, 40s or whatever, in the 80s when they saw this, and then they saw them go back in time, like, oh, yeah, I remember Mr. Sandman, and, stuff like that. So, because it's about, family and, generations and all that kind of thing. So there's something in here for everybody, right? Because everybody knows, like, a bully, right? Everybody's like, Biff is like the perfect, like stereotype of a bully, and even then, right? It's very satisfying to get that comeuppance. But then when he changes the future, you see what happens to him. And let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about exactly kind of like let's put on the nerd hat here and think about this. So like clearly, Back to the Future, it doesn't, because we've talked about time travel before on Fantastic Steve with the Terminator, and my favorite time travel is like the whole predestination paradox, all this stuff happened, right? Like the first Terminator.
Never happened.
But here, clearly that's not the case, because things change.
Right.
So like, because he again, all these little details, right? They start out at Twin Pines Mall. Marty kills the pine tree in the 50s, so it's Lone Pine Mall, right?
Right.
So even stuff like that, but also something I didn't even notice until looking up trivia for this. We find out in the very first return shot when he goes back to the future, when you saw Doc was up there, he kind of slips on the ledge, breaks off some of the ledge. That was not like that in the original 80s, right? But when you come back to the future, when we come back to the future, you see the helicopter fly over the clock tower, like, hey, it's the future now. But there's a spotlight that goes right on the clock, and you can see the damage from Doc in the 50s on there. I didn't even notice that until I looked up trivia for that. So even
I
there,
never noticed that one either.
Yeah, so even there you see, like, there's a change, right? And then, of course, we see more and more changes. We see, Lone Pine Mall. Doc ended up saving the letter. He's like, I figured, what the hell? I buy that. I liked how stern, like, Marty, the whole movie, he was trying to tell Doc what was going to happen. And Doc kind of had an idea, but didn't want to, get to know, because too much knowledge of the future can screw up everything, as is the plot of this movie. He's like, I'll endanger my own existence as you have yourself. And that's a valid point. But, like, you start to see all these things changing, and then, of course, Marty gets home, and it's all totally changed. So like... I guess my question is, so we have a new timeline here. The Marty that Marty sees go back in time. This was his timeline. So I guess he just replaces him, right? Like, does he not have, like, because Marty has his memories from his timeline, but he's in this new timeline. So is there like another Marty somewhere? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Well, all I want to know is this Marty the Red Angel?
No, Marty's dad was the Red Angel.
Oh, Marty's dad was the
but
Red
only
Angel.
for a little bit. Only for a little bit.
Yes, only for a little bit.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, if you stop to think about it, you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I mean, because, if he goes back in time and it's not himself, then there should be two Martys now, right? Because there's the Marty that would then have been born, right? But I don't know, whatever. I don't care. I don't care because it's a 2-hour movie, right? It's a 2-hour movie that's designed to tell a story, and it's designed to entertain you. So, like, yes, there are holes that you can pick apart in this, and I'm okay with that because time travel itself is ridiculous.
Right.
Okay, and it will never happen. And so whatever they decide to do when he comes back, whether they pushed him out of that reality or whatever, I don't know, I don't care. Like, just come up with your own thing for it.
Well, it's just fun to try and figure out. And I mean,
because if we go into the second one, if Biff goes back in time and makes himself a millionaire, then Doc never would have made the DeLorean and da 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 da.
Right. But the rules of the Back to the Future universe are inconsistent.
They're fun and fancy free. They're a little bit loose.
Yeah, but they say, hey, look, if history continues on its present course, this is going to happen. So that's how they raise the stakes, because it's not like the whole dissipate. Like one of the whole things of the film is like he has this picture of him and his brother and sister, right?
Yeah.
And as the film goes on and Marty hasn't fixed things, they keep disappearing. You know, it's like that's not how it would work. They would either exist or not exist, right? But
but it gives you a time. It gives you a clock. It gives you a ticking clock.
Right.
Okay?
So they keep those rules going throughout the whole trilogy. Like, they have objects that like change the way they look and that kind of thing. And so those rules are within the Back to the Future universe. The rules are pretty consistent, even though they're just having fun with it. So. And
if we didn't have that picture, then how would we have known we were almost dead in the Back to the Future Nintendo game? Oh man, that game was hard. Games were hard in the 80s. That Back to the Future Nintendo game was impossible.
But you got your money's worth back then, right? Because you paid $60 for a game. You're like, you're going to play this for weeks in order to win.
Yeah. Years and never win. Years and never win.
I love this. There's so many great lines in here, but like talking about the disappearing picture, like, and it's even a GIF now that you use when everybody says like erased, right? It's when Doc Brown looks at the picture, he's like, erased from existence. Like, it's just such a great line. And Christopher Lloyd brings so much to it too. Like, I just, their chemistry here is what makes this whole trilogy. And it is, again, like, I cannot imagine Eric Stoltz doing these things.
I can't either.
But yeah, so you know, the end, they go back to the future, and Marty has improved. He's improved himself. He's improved his family's life. You know, like another one-liner is, you know, Jimmy Olsen there sitting there in a suit. I think he worked at Burger King or something. He was wearing a Burger King costume, a Burger King uniform last time we saw him. And Marty's like, "What the hell are you wearing?" He's like, "I always wear a suit to the office, Marty." He just like, so he's improved his whole family's lives. But Brandon, why
everybody's life is better, but they all still live at home with mom and dad.
They all still live at home, and why do they live in the same house? So that's the fun you can have if you start picking it apart. But actually, you know my biggest problem with this movie though is, Brandon, is
what's that?
Is when they go to the garage to open it up, and the parking job of the truck. That's my biggest problem with me. How did you get that in there, and how are you supposed to pull it out? That's my one problem with this movie, is how that truck is parked in the garage at the end. Next time you guys rewatch it, take a look. Think about how you would park that car if that was your garage. Okay, anyway.
That's funny. Do you have a favorite joke, like a one-liner in this that's like a tongue-in-cheek time travel joke? I got one that I think of, so I can tell you first if you want.
What's yours?
Mine is when he's playing Johnny Be Good at the dance, and you know the guy's hand is broken, so he has to play, and then he calls him up. He's like, "It's your cousin Marvin Berry." right? Take a listen to
Hey,
this.
Chuck, listen to this. Yeah.
I don't know.